Kære deltagere, så er det igen den tid på året, hvor vi skal mødes og tale museumsformidling i alle dets aspekter. Det har danske museumsfolk gjort med stor interesse, og ja, i nu 45 år. I starten mødtes man i en slags protest mod formidling, det ikke var et tema i sig selv, og det var i slutningen af 60'erne, så gammel er det. I 70 satte man sig sammen i en emnegruppe på et fagligt årsmøde, og fra 74, og det vil sige for 45 år siden, siden den tid har det været afholdt som et selvstændigt møde. Og siden har danske museumsfolk i større og større tal mødtes nogenlunde i den her rammesætning, som vi nu skal ind for i de næste 2 dage. Der er selvfølgelig sket lidt ændringer her og der med fornyelser, men vi har holdt fast i, at det er en frivillig arbejdsgruppe, der forestår at finde ud af, hvad er der af spændende og aktuelle temaer, og lægger det faglige indhold. Gennem de sidste 4 år har det så været i et samarbejde mellem ODM og Foreningen Museumsformidlere i Danmark, og det er vi rigtig, rigtig glade for. I år har arbejdsgruppen valgt at sætte et overordnet fokus på temaet det grænseløse museum og museernes identitet i en foranderlig tid. Vi oplever jo meget stort fokus på museernes formidlingsmæssige performance i de her år. Det er den, må vi nok sige, af de 5 søjler, som museerne skal befinde sig indenfor. Det er det, som har topprioritet i omverdenen og i meget høj grad også fokus, når man taler både selvfølgelig hos de faglige, men også på direktørgangene. Og vi vil jo alle sammen meget gerne også have gang i at møde nogle nye brugergrupper. Så derfor er der overordnet fokus, hvor vi er på vej hen som formidlings- og kulturinstitutioner. Og i år gør det vi med hjælp af tidens væsentlige danske debattører og en visionær museumsleder fra England, som der senere bliver introduceret til. Det hele bliver sat i scene for at belyse museernes mulige rum til formidling og relevans for nutiden, både hos brugere og ikke-brugere. Og derfor har arbejdsgruppen også sat det drillende spørgsmål. Hvad nu hvis? Kunne vi ikke udfordre? Hvorfor ikke? Væk med plejere. Med de mange spændende oplægsholdere skal vi nok få både provokerende og spændende debat, der gerne skal medvirke til, at man efter seminaret tager hjem med nye indsigter og er måske også blevet flyttet i sin praksis. Vi har også i år på anden dagen et marked, og husk at bakke op om det initiativ og opsøge de mange stande, som bliver stillet op. Den del af arrangementet forestås af museumstjenesten, og det er også med til at generere et mindre tilskud til hele programmet. Igen et 1000 tak til MID, Museumsformidler i Danmark, for at jeg kan stå her og byde velkommen på vegne af ODM for et meget flot og kompetent og væsentligt program. Og derudover er det grund til at sige tak til ODMs lille team, som endnu en gang har sørget for, at det hele det kommer til at gå som smurt i olie og med værelseskvartering og lyd og lys og alt muligt andet praktisk. Og så vil jeg gerne give ordet nu til formanden for MID. Birgit, hvor sidder du? Der var du.
Ja, tak. Velkommen til alle sammen. Jeg synes, den er lidt høj, den her. Nå. Det grænseløse museum, det er årets tema for Formidlingsseminaret. Og med tanken på et grænseløst museum, så har vi jo også en grænseløs mængde af muligheder. Derfor så er det vigtigt, at vi som museumsformidlere står sammen, og vi får sat formidling på dagsordenen. Og det kan vi blandt andet gøre ved at være i en forening som MID og i et større fællesskab sammen med ODM. Og i den forbindelse vil jeg gerne sige tak til ODM for et godt og solidt samarbejde endnu en gang, og vi glæder os selvfølgelig til at fortsætte. Vi er glade for at se så mange af jer, og vi håber, at vi ser jer igen til næste år. Og før det, så vil vi gerne se jer til temadagene, som MID afholder i løbet af året. Og næste gang, det er i september, og det foregår på Kamp Blixen Museet. Og det er selvfølgelig gratis for medlemmer af MID. Jeg vil gerne opfordre jer til at holde øje med vores Facebook og vores hjemmeside. Og havde vi da bare lige så mange medlemmer i virkeligheden og på listen, som vi har følgere på Facebook. Vi har nemlig hele 1761, så der er potentiale. Meld jer ind, venner. Jeg måtte ikke sige kammerater, fik jeg at vide i går. Det er i MID, vi kan styrke det her faglige fællesskab, og at vi kan nyde godt af hinandens engagement. Og MID er jo den her organisation, som er for det enkelte individ, der interesserer sig for formidling, og det er forstået i en bred forstand. For 350 kroner, det er jo ingenting. Vi har ikke regnet det ud i antal slikgram, men det kunne vi jo gøre. 350 kroner om året, så har du et kæmpestort fællesskab. Du kan komme på seminarer, du får et medlemsmagasin, og så har du en bestyrelse, som i den grad arbejder for at sætte museumsformidlingen på dagsordenen. Og derfor har vi også lavet noget nyt og epokeafgørende i år. Vi har nemlig indstiftet årets formidlerpris. Og ideen med den pris, det er, at den skal være med til at sætte museumsformidlingen på dagsordenen. Og vi håber, at formidlerprisen vil motivere alle danske og grønlandske og færøske formidlere i at tænke kreativt. Og vi vil gerne have at se, at der opstår relevant nytænkende. Og indstillet bliver afsløret, og de 3 nominerede bliver bragt frem, og så endelig afslører vi en vinder i aften under middagen. Og så er der selvfølgelig det spritfriske MID-magasin nummer 40. Ikke smør 40, men bare nummer 40. Det ligger til alle, og det forholder sig selvfølgelig traditionen tro til dette års tema, nemlig det grænseløse museum. Og jeg vil gerne lige sige tak til alle, som har budt ind med artikler i bladet. Og er man medlem af MID, så modtager man jo også et efterårsmagasin. Og i det her år, til efteråret her, der laver vi det sammen med Danske Museer. Og temaet det bliver So Me, og ønsker man at bidrage med en artikel, så skal man gerne sende en lille mail til en fra MID-bestyrelsen. Den finder I i kolonnen herinde. I MID, der bryder vi grænser mellem de traditionelle museumskategorier, kunst og kultur og natur. Formidling er og samarbejde er i højsædet. Vi glæder os til nye grænseløse tider. Ha' et godt seminar.
I næsten 40 år, der var Derby Silk Mill. Det var et sådan helt almindeligt, halvkedeligt museum i Midt-England. Der var ikke ret mange ansatte, der var heller ikke ret mange besøgende. Og sådan stod det egentlig på i lang tid, indtil i 2011, hvor det lokale byråd det besluttede sig for at omprioritere. De lukkede museet ned i 2 år, flyttede midlerne over til nogle andre institutioner i byen, og det kunne så egentlig have været starten på sådan en dødsspiral, som vi også kender andre steder fra. I stedet for, så blev det så på en eller anden forunderlig vis sådan en begyndelse på en revitalisering, hvor de så, som det ser ud nu, åbner næste år til september med et nyt museum, en ny forretningsmodel, en masse penge fra fonde i ryggen og næsten 500 frivillige, der bakker op omkring det her projekt med at skabe et nyt borgerinvolverende museum og grænseoverskridende museum i Derby. So, well, please welcome our first keynote speaker. This is Hannah Fox from, and you are Director of Products and Programs, as far as I remember. Yeah, in Derby, yeah. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very strange to be introduced, and I don't understand how I've been introduced. So thank you so much for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be with you all today. As Jakob said, my name is Hannah Fox. I'm Director of Projects and Programs at Derby Museums. I oversee all the projects at Derby Museums, as well as learning and participation, exhibitions, collections and curatorship, and interpretation and display. I have a really great job. So I work for an organization that believes in the power of empathy, and that what we do has the potential to change lives. Derby Museums was formed as an independent organisation, taken out. That's okay. Are we good? Is this better? Yeah. Okay. Everyone here? Yes, great. So Derby Museums was formed as an independent organisation, taken out of local authority control with City Council in 2012. It looks after 3 museums. Oh.
Sorry.
Technical?
Yeah.
This is how it rolls, YouTube. Okay. Are we good? This all sounds fine? Okay. So we look after 3 museums in Derby and the collections within them. There's a museum and art gallery, which has fine art collections, including the best collection of 18th century Enlightenment artist Joseph Wright. World collections, natural history collections. We talk there about the world around us. The Silk Mill was an industrial museum for 40 years before being closed in 2011. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that new museum of making being created here and how it represents the city and its impact locally and internationally. And finally, Pickford's House, an 18th century townhouse built by the architect Joseph Pickford. Here we talk about what the home means to us. At Derby Museums, we think our museums should be for the head, for the heart, and for the hands. We want people to be able to think, to feel, and to do. We use co-production and human-centered design, or design thinking, as some people say, as the methods for how we work. Co-production, because involving communities and stakeholders in what we do enables the sharing and the exchanging of skills, the development of ideas beyond our scope of knowledge, the opportunity to create projects and programs that are mutually beneficial, and that's the us in museum. It took us a while before we saw that there was an us in museum, but when we actually needed a branding company to help us see it. But it totally sums up for us what we're talking about. And human-centered design, because we want to ensure that what we do in our museums is driven by need. Our communities and our stakeholders' needs and their desires, not by our idea of what they need. We design with empathy and we take action. We think, we feel, and we do. And human-centered design has several modes, as you'll see up here. We've been able to link these directly to our collections of Joseph Wright of Derby and the incredible narrative that we can draw from the 18th century Enlightenment in the UK. And we can apply that to our work today. So, define and understand. What is the issue that we are trying to solve or change? What are our guiding principles? Who's involved? What does success look like? And are there available resources and constraints that we need to be working within? This painting is Joseph Wright's Philosopher by Lamplight, where the philosopher is studying the human form and people gathering to understand a day and asking questions about what makes us human. Think and imagine then, what is our ideas and how far can we push them if we're willing to take risks and experiment? This is the alchemist in search of the philosopher's stone discovers phosphorus. So the idea that if we're open to risk and experimentation, could we discover something even more valuable? And then modeling and prototyping. What ideas can we take forwards? Which are strongest? How can we push them and combine them and expand them and refine our ideas through prototyping and pilots? This is a blacksmith shop, one of my favorite paintings actually, where people come together over a raw material to make something together in community. And then test and evaluate. How are we going to know that it's worked? This is the painting that we don't have in our collection. It's the one at the National Gallery, and if you've ever watched James Bond's Skyfall, it's in the back when James Bond meets the Q in the National Gallery, and it's because it's all talking about the technology of today. So what improvements do we need to make? What do people think about what they've done? This painting tells us about a live experiment that's showing how ideas are tested and explored. Will the bird come back to life when the air is pumped back in? And how frightening it is to try something new or to look at change. And then make and share. What resources do we need to make it happen? Who else needs to be part of it? And then build it. Who should we be telling about what we're doing? How does it feed into the work of others? So just like I'm doing here today, this thing about how we share the experiences that we've had, the things that have gone well, the things that have not gone well. And this painting we do have in our collection. This is the philosopher giving that lecture on the orrery, in which the lamp is put in place of the sun, where Joseph is sharing a contemporary understanding of the planets and how this was being shared with others around the country. So, how did we decide this is how we were going to work? Well, we were really lucky. We were able to relaunch in 2012 as a new organisation, which aims with included redevelop the Silk Mill as a new museum and ensure community engagement is embedded in everything that we do. We were an organisation in name, but it had been part of our local authority in the council for decades. And as a result, it carried lots of baggage that came from a slow-moving, risk-adverse culture. And it was into this that I came originally as a consultant, tasked to look at the Silk Mill. So here we are. This is the Silk Mill, 2012. It had been closed because of a failed funding application to our lottery funders. And then what came out of that was this resulting plans to try and create a new organisation. It's fair to say that the museums in Derby had been having a very difficult time. The Silk Mill was a really key example of this. It had been an industrial museum for nearly 40 years, and the displays and the exhibits had barely changed in that time. These Rolls-Royce engines had sat there for all of that time. Visitor numbers had dropped, and a plan that the council had tried to develop and had failed to attract support or funding. A report that had been done prior to my arrival had identified 17 different options for what the museum could be, from selling it into apartments, through to Museum of Fashion, or a centre for STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, as ones to be considered. But it was really important to me for us to put those to one side and try and understand what Derby and its communities desired and needed. And that's quite a scary thing. It was very scary at that time. There's so many expectations from others. While it had been, a quiet museum, it was really important to people and holding that very heart, closely in their hearts. So you have these expectations from others, from staff, from councillors in the council, from volunteers, from city partners, all with their ideas of what it should be. I wanted to hold those expectations in a way that allowed us to explore and to understand the why and the how that comes from a human-centred approach. There was no money at that point, but an amazing building to utilise. And we reopened for a weekend that we called Shaping the Vision. We invited people back in. We painted a blackboard, I love blackboards, of the floor plan. We put great coffee on and we put some music on, and we asked people, what are your desires and needs? We wanted to find out what was really troubling people or challenging them, affecting their lives or their communities, as well as their aspirations and their ambitions. During this weekend, over 800 people came into this closed museum. Some came curious just to know what was going on as they'd heard the building had closed, some to come and express their real anger about the fact that the building had closed. But we were ready for that. We had a group of friend volunteers that had been discussing how to respond to that anger, trying not to take it personally, but to greet it with empathy, to listen and to respond with, I know, I hear you. It is sad that the building's closed. What did you love about coming here when you did come here? What do you think are the challenges facing your communities, and what would you like to see or do here next? And would you like to help? And they shared their ideas and their challenges, and they did help. And we needed that help. We did not have the skills and the resources to take these ideas forward, so we co-produced these events and activities over the following months that engaged over 30,000 people in the closed museum, experimenting and exploring what we all needed this to be. From running engineering sessions to developing live music events with young people who did not want to perform in bars, too young to be able to do that, but wanted to be able to share their music, through to looking outside of the things that we'd been doing to other things that were happening internationally and tapping into those programs like Maker Fairs and the Art Science Prize. We explored and we decided lots and lots of different things, and we learned an awful lot about our communities, about ourselves, and what the possibilities were. We also rediscovered the stories that we had not really been telling of experimentation and of engineering, of art and science and world-changing ideas that has led to Derby currently standing as a leading city of innovation in the UK, from the Silk Mill, there on the left-hand side, as the site of the world's first factory, established in 1721 and totally transforming the way things are being manufactured from a single power source. These were known as engines. And today it is the southern gateway to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site. To the work of Joseph Wright then in the late 18th century, capturing Enlightenment thinking and arts and sciences all being part of the same conversation instead of separate. Through to then the railways. So Derby was a railway manufacturing town in the 19th century, and we still make railways today. So this story has been ongoing. This is St Pancras in London, and all of the ironwork there was cast in Derbyshire. It's a really beautiful station. If you haven't been, it's a really, really beautiful one to go and see. To then businesses like Rolls and Royce, who built an engine, this engine that was in the museum but did not have any interpretation with it. And it's the engine that flew the first plane across the Atlantic in 1919. And Rolls-Royce still have their global headquarters in Derby today. To then digital creativity and innovation. For example, who knew that Lara Croft and Tomb Raider was invented in Derby? Well, people in Derby didn't know for a long time. So today, then, Derby being a #1 high-tech city in the UK, more people employed in advanced engineering than anywhere else. It's a really incredible story. However, we also discovered that against this story, we also have school attainment in Derby continuing to decline. And Derby has been identified as one of the most challenged cities across England when it comes to social mobility. People are not being employed into these skilled industries from the city. We're having to import the skills into the city, which is very, very strange, this disconnect between those two stories. So we looked at what we'd understood and what we discovered. We realized it is not STEM, it's STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. And arts, recognizing creativity as an essential life skill and discipline that we just need to be talking about, and engineering being a creative industry, problem solving, development, design. It's actually all about making. The maker movement of the 18th century and the maker movement of today, and Derby as a city of makers. And that we need to expand perspectives of what our museums are and what they can be for people. We need to think much more widely about what can happen in our museums and what they can represent. Lastly, in order to do all of that, we need to see that people should feel entitled to participate. We need to remove the threshold and invite people in to share these publicly owned assets with the people who own them. So we secured a small amount of funding to bring in 2 new team members and an architect team into the project, and a capital seed fund to kickstart a full options appraisal for the building in phase 1. And we asked ourselves this question: how might we use the making of a museum as an opportunity to experiment, to involve, and to enrich? Asking how might we is a crucial part of reframing the challenge and opportunity you've discovered into a vision question full of possibility and to be done together. We threw up loads of ideas into the mix, and the strongest one formed the basis of a project called Remake. The idea was to prototype the museum by stripping out and refurbishing just the ground floor of the building and then refitting it. But rather than doing that behind closed doors, do that as our public programme. Get the people of Derby to be part of making this museum and to feel a sense of ownership over this public asset, to bring their ideas and their skills into the mix. And especially for young people, to see that there's a space where you can take risks, you can make mistakes, and it's okay. But also for our staff team to try something completely different and realize that they too can feel the fear and they can do it anyway. We refurbished the ground floor space. We stripped it back to its bare materials. We learned a lot about the highs and lows of capital programs. I'd never done a capital program before. Anyone in here who's had any involvement in a capital program knows how painful it is. But we learned about asbestos. We learned about litigation and the fact that people are protecting their positions. If you're the architect, if you're the construction team, you're protecting your position constantly, because that's how the construction industry is set up. It's about blame. And it's about, a culture of keeping things to yourself and protecting your position. Local students, though, they came in and they painted our workshops ready to be fitted out for all types of making. And we spent the money on kit, which, if you're a technical person, I love tech. We spent it on kit, basically. From traditional techniques to digital making. And at the end of 2013, we opened with an evening called Reveal, with nothing in there apart from, you can see this, the wine in the wheelbarrows that goes down well. We had a lot of people come for that evening, and some people came they came and did speeches. The mayor did a speech, and it was, hey, we've got the silk mill back open, isn't it amazing? And I thought, some point, someone is going to realize there's actually no museum here. And I don't know whether it's because we communicated it really well, or have you heard of the story Emperor's New Clothes? Or whether it was a bit of both, and people were like, oh, does anyone realize there's no museum? Oh, let's just carry on. But they did, they opened it, we had wine, everyone was happy, and then there was nothing in there. But what we did was then invited our communities to come back in and prototype this fit out with us, using this ground floor as basically a project laboratory. We opened up the conversation about our objects and expanded our knowledge, not only looking at the facts, but the emotional and the social responses. What do or don't we know about these objects, but how do they make us feel? What memories do they provoke, or the connections do we make with them? And we openly explored our collection needs, challenging ourselves about whether things should be in cases, whether they can be on the wall, unprotected, what do we need to do, what do we need to consider, and inviting people into that conversation to challenge us about it, opening the doors to our museum practice, seeking input and their challenges as to what is actually important. And then exploring what are our desires and our needs as people, what drives us, or what do we feel is missing from our lives, and how can what we design together help fulfill those. And then if you think about ideas, if anything was possible, what could we do? What are our influences and ideas, and who's it for, and who else needs to be involved, and inviting them in. And then taking those ideas and trying them out, prototyping, low cost, opens new skills, the fact that we can make mistakes, it's okay, we'll adapt and we'll change. And everyone getting really hands-on with the tools and technology to develop the skills and the knowledge to make things. People got involved in all aspects of this, many of whom had either never visited the museum before or had very rarely come to Derby museums beforehand, despite living in or near the city. Contributed thousands of volunteer hours, from unskilled to highly skilled and professional. We made some crazy things. We made crazy crate chairs and unexpected exhibition cases. And the site of the world's first factory became a place of manufacturing once more, as part, basically, of the public programme. So at the end of 2014, we created a prototype museum where we could deliver pilot exhibitions and conferences, use it as a venue space and learning programs, as well as do open make sessions with volunteers who could come in and work on their own projects in our publicly accessible workshop. For example, Morgan here, he used the workshop to develop his ideas to make bespoke skateboards as a business. And in return, he taught coding to children from the local high school on Wednesday afternoons. We also had enough evidence and clarity of direction to think about how we would submit for funding applications. We did an evaluation program during Remake where we did heart monitor, blood pressure, and took cheek swabs of people before and after they actually took part in some of our activities to see, could we actually clinically see the impact that it has on our lives? You can do life surveys, and that's great, but actually was there a way we could actually measure how our body changes with that? And we were able to see that the heart monitor and blood pressure barely changed, but the cortisol levels dropped considerably, and we could, with a university study, then prove that culture makes you feel good. And actually that research is on our website. You're very welcome to download it and use it for any funding applications. So we submitted stage 1 applications to the lottery and enterprise funders for a total of £17 million for a new museum of making. And both of these things that we learned had helped us to start to answer the first 2 of those organisation aims, to create this new museum at the Silk Mill, but more importantly, in some ways, and like I'm saying that, a museum is incredibly important, but that sort of sense of being able to embed participation in everything that we do, that was really a game changer for us. We knew it was the right direction because it was driven by the desires and the needs of our communities, and people had been part of making it happen. But what we also discovered through Remake was that we could do it. Co-production and human-centered design was becoming embedded and habitual within our staff teams and our organisation as a result, because we prototyped it. So we redefined our project question. how might we use the making of a museum of making to engage people's heads, hearts and hands and empower them to see themselves as 21st century makers, creators and innovators? What role could we fulfill in helping bridging the skills gap in the region using our assets and our approaches? We clarified our project principles, so inspired by the makers of the past, so celebrating and harnessing our making heritage through rich stories and 100% access to our collections. Previously, when it was an industrial museum, there was around 4 or 5% of our collections on display, and we want to move to 100% accessibility. And then made by the makers of today, working in collaboration with our communities and our partners to develop new skills, to share knowledge and make a museum that's designed by and relevant to them. And then through those things and the programs that we'll deliver there, empower those makers of the future, build our aspirations and positively address that skills gap. And really importantly, the Museum of Making will be STEAM powered. So we couldn't tell the funders what it was going to look like. Now that's a challenge. If you're putting a funding application in and you're not doing lots of exhibition designs and you're not putting yay, this is what it's going to be, this is amazing, fund this. We were saying, no, fund the process that we're going to go through, because we're going to co-design this. We haven't finished co-designing this yet. And this is the first time that we sort of articulated this approach that we said, our new organizational approach, and put it on paper and said, okay, this is how we're working and this is how we, the process that we're going through. So us in museum, co-produced, human-centered, think, feel, do. And they got it. The funders supported us. They funded us in principle for all of the money. And what happens is you go through 2 stages. That stage 1, they go, yay, we think you're on the right track. Here's a little bit of this money to get it up to the next stage. And then you spend up to 2 years working up to that next stage. And then you submit your stage 2 applications. But it meant that we could actually expand the team and we could co-produce the full concept through another phase called Reimagine. This was really amazing. And we were like, yes, we've got the money, we're woohoo. But we were exhausted because it is really, something to keep powering on and all those relationships that you're building and all of that energy that you need to put in there. So we decided to pause and stop for a moment and reset. We closed the building for 6 weeks to give us a moment to breathe, to reflect, to gain fresh perspective and bring in new team members and volunteers on board. We bought new sewing machines. We just bought a cheap vinyl cutter. We needed to make cushions and we needed to create our own interpretation. Many of our volunteers were expert sewers and we learned from them. We learned how to route into metal. That sounds, ugh. How to veneer. And these skills not limited to technicians, but to all of us feeling that we can be makers. When we opened the doors again 6 weeks later, we felt really refreshed and re-energized with new skills and exciting challenges to explore. So how might we create 100% access to the collections? How are we going to do that? Personally and organizationally. To share a little bit of what we've learned. We've had to say no to pet projects. So I'm glad to see that you understand the phrase. A project that you treat as your own personal pet to stroke your own ego. We've had to say, no, we can't. We do not have the time or the resource. And that's not what we should be doing. We've also had to let go of ourselves, our own well-held opinion of ourselves as being the experts and the specialists, to see that we actually have a lot to learn and that our communities are best placed to teach us. That's not to say that we can't have expertise and we can't have specialisms. Of course we can. But we have a shared expertise and a shared set of specialisms that when you bring them together, actually are more powerful than any one person holding that. We've also had to restructure our organization. We've done it at least twice. We've actually done a soft one as well. Amplifying previously soft voices in the organization and bringing in new ones. We now have a structure that encourages cross-discipline working and ideas from everyone to be shared and acted upon. So project teams are made up of people from all over the organization. We aren't always getting it right, and we do know that, and we are actively trying to understand why and then do something about it. So we work hard not to fall back into negative spaces and old habits, particularly difficult when money is tight and time and capacities are very stretched and it's stressful. But we do need to support any one of us who says, it'd just be easier if I did it myself. to understand that when it comes to our public offer, it rarely is. What we end up with is narrower and less impactful, not just the result, but the process of doing it. If we hadn't worked like this with the silk mill, we would have created a museum of fashion or a centre for STEM. Well meant, but top down and out of touch. And it's taken a massive mind shift and habits of mind that we've had to adopt. A culture shift to move ourselves out of the default position of blaming others when things go wrong, holding ourselves accountable for what we're doing in our museums and how we are working with each other. We don't want to feel that discomfort and that pain that comes when you actually blame, in a blame mindset. It reflects on our offer. We've had to, understand that we're really lucky to be working in museums, and it shouldn't be somewhere that we feel angry and unhappy to be, or where we miss opportunities for empathy because we're too busy being in that space. So being accountable, holding ourselves accountable for what we do in our museums, holding ourselves accountable as people for the way that we are with each other. It's hard when it's so nice sometimes to be in that kind of environment of blame, but that's been something we've got to really work on a lot. Seeing change is constant. Change is always happening. Our museums are the perfect representation of change, because we capture those stories. But that is tough for people when people are in an environment where they feel that change is happening around them and they don't have any control over it and they don't feel involved in it. So how do you shift into seeing change as constant? Asking why, so we ask why a lot. Like, why are we doing this? Why is it important to people? Why are people not engaging with this? How do we change that? And then understanding what we can do and asking how might we? And then designing with empathy and taking action. So shifting ourselves out into that public space constantly. Experimentation and prototyping. We do not want to throw millions of pounds into a project that actually might not be right, because we haven't piloted, we haven't prototyped it and learned from that experience. We also need to look beyond our frame of reference. So we really encourage ourselves to not just look at what other museums are doing, but what is the world doing? Is someone else got this problem that we've got? How did they solve it in a different sector? Raising your hand and asking for help, that's hard, right? Because it shows that you're being vulnerable. And as a museums organisation, we've had to do that. We don't have the time, we don't have the capacity, we don't know, we don't have the skills. Can you help? But also as an individual, no matter where you are in the organisation, knowing when you have to say, I need help to work through this problem. And then co-producing for mutual benefit. Not just that we're kind of doing it to people and they're, oh, isn't it great, they're having a great experience, our museums are more relevant, but actually that we are benefiting too as museum people. So museums contribute most to communities, not when they help each other, I think, but when they amplify the capacities of people to connect and collaborate with each other. Helping people is not enough. We need to work to give themselves and ourselves agency to change and habits of mind that see all of those things. We want to see our museums as collective enterprises where we work together to consider our place in the world and where we need to tackle the challenges facing us. Because in a world where resources are really finite, we need to use them carefully and resist spending that vast amounts of public money, which is predominantly where the funding comes from in the UK, till we've understood and imagined and prototyped and tested in collaboration with our communities, human-centred, led by needs and desires. We should support that experimentation and teams who work across the disciplines. Challenge the norm and be brave. I'm not saying like tattoo it on your arm, like I have done, which I reference constantly. Yeah, okay, feel the fear, do it anyway. It's all going to be fine. Although I've seen quite a lot of people here with tattoos, which is quite interesting. But we definitely need to find ways to feel the fear and do it anyway. And finally, we must use our unique qualities in museums as trusted civic spaces, because they are really trusted. We've done a lot of surveying that's happened in the UK about, the trusted public services, and museums rate highly in terms of being trusted by people to be telling the truth. But we need to build mutual relationships with people and create these non-hierarchical, empathetic museums of the future, places where you can think, where you can feel, and where you can do. Because rather than assuming that we know, we've taken the time to ask people the right questions and to listen and to understand what they are telling us. Thank you for listening to me.
So thank you for a wonderful presentation, Hannah. We have a few minutes for questions. So anybody feel like have any burning questions on your mind? Yeah, it's always down the opposite end of the room. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Per Laursen and I'm from a museum in Western Jutland. What if the public want to do things with your museums that you really didn't think fit in a museum? How do you do that? Because if you are in a development process and people are going in a totally other direction than actually with this is within the framework of museums, how do you do that without disappointing people, or do you do that?
That's a great question, and I think you always have to carry those people in the same space as you to understand why are we doing this. So when we share those principles and we develop those principles together, we agree that how might we question, so that we are using that as the reference point for then we're jumping off into the next stage. And it means that as people start, including us, start to kind of go into a different direction, which is okay to do because you don't want to shut down the fact that something actually might really work. So we'll encourage that experimentation and we'll encourage those wild ideas, and then we'll go and try and prototype them, see whether they do work, take us in that direction. We'll encourage that to happen. But we'll also keep reminding ourselves, why are we doing this? Does the thing that we've come up with, does that idea that actually may be a pet project that's coming through, does that sit with those project principles? Does that sit and help us answer that original question? And actually, more often than not, people will reflect on that and they will then say, oh no, I'm heading in a different direction. So there's a bit of both things where you are the facilitator and supporter in developing and testing those ideas and being honest and transparent about that, but that you're also holding the project through into that vision statement that enables us to collectively understand, are we still answering that question, or are we going off on the wrong kind of direction? So it's a bit of a balance of trying it, why not, try it, but also coming back and checking in with yourself about what you were originally trying to do.
What's your vision statement?
So we will come up with those how might we questions. So how might we question that says, how might we make a museum of making that engages the head, hearts and hands to create makers, innovators and creators of the future? Are we doing that? Does the things that we've got, that idea, is that working? Does that support that? Or is it taking us into the wrong space? And there might be a number of how might we questions that you have about specific projects as well. Usually they have their aims and objectives embedded within them, so that they're not just how can we create a learning program for young people who are hard to reach? That doesn't do anything, because why are they hard to reach? How do you include that in that question too? So how you ask the right question to set that vision statement up is really important.
Karen Salomon, design anthropologist. My question is, with your focus on making, which I find very inspiring, how do you distinguish your project from all the culture houses, all the workshops, engaging workshops that have existed for tens and tens of years in local communities with similar bottom-up approaches and so on? How do you see the difference? They often also have small displays. They often also relate to local histories, local collections. So how is this different, essentially, from culture houses, workshops, and ceramics or crafts?
Because it is the Museum of Making, and in the sense that we aren't going to try and copy or replicate or change ourselves to try and be like or unlike something. It has to emerge because it's the right thing for these communities working with us and this space and the assets that we have. If there are local makers, actually one of the programs that we're running is called MakeWorks, where we are actually documenting and filming all of those small industries and making sure that we can be a hub for people to reach those and amplify those, rather than see them as something that are competitive or something that even we need to shape our offer to be like, because then it wouldn't be true to the process that we've gone through about what's specific for the people that we're working with and their needs and desires. We're pretty adaptable, so if it changes and needs to change, it will. And it needs to, because the world changes around us. I think the challenges that people have found in some of those in the maker movement and some of those public maker workshops and maker spaces is sustainability, relevance, and how do you where do you sit? And a lot of museums actually have seen, as I've realised over the years, a lot of museums are going, the maker movement, that is something that we need to tap into. Or libraries thinking the same thing. And if you can do it on and be true to what you're doing, rather than import it in and drop it down into your museum as a solution, then it will be sustainable because you're actually being true to your own self. So by amplifying those other places and hopefully supporting them to be, because we may have more resource than them, and therefore how can they be utilising our resource to support the things they're doing, but also they may have more skills than us, so how can they come in and help us and work with us to make sure that what we're shaping is going to be right.
There's one last question here.
Oh yeah.
Jakob Sirup from the Museum of Bornholm. Thank you for an inspiring presentation. I was wondering about the objects, because it's lovely that you can engage the community, but how about the collections? How do you engage the collections? How do they find out what's in your, what do you have, and how do they use it, and how do you make that connect?
Well, that's the starting point, isn't it? It's got to be about the building as an object in its own right and an artifact in its own right, because it's changed through the 3 centuries and it's burned down and it's fallen in the river and it's been rebuilt every single time within a year, which is really interesting that this has been so important to people that it's immediately been rebuilt every time there's been a catastrophe. But the objects are king. That's why we need to get 100% access to them rather than 4% access to them. Interestingly, we had lots of original ideas about how will we display these objects. How do we organize them? How do we make sure that people can engage with them as well? And through the process that we've gone through, we've actually came up with the people predominantly, when we put like 100 objects out and say, how would you exhibit these? How would you order these? How do you respond to them? The predominant one was about material. So they're actually going to be organized via material taxonomy that's got 8 different categories to it. And that's really interesting, because that means that you could be looking at ceramics. You could be interested in ceramics and be looking at Derby porcelain. And we have a great collection of Derby porcelain. But you might equally then, unexpectedly, see right next to it a ceramic brake pad for a Formula 1 car that has been made in the city as well. So what we're trying to do is make it as easy as people to engage with the objects that they are interested in, but also, and so they can curate their own journeys around the museum, but also make sure that there are opportunities for surprise and for wonder, and then to use that object to then be the starting point for you in thinking about, well, how was it made, who made it, and how can I make one? And then have the facilities in order to take that forwards. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.